Loonies, Benthelooney here. Movies. We all love them. I'm a movie guy, and I've seen a lot in my time. And I found myself always picking and choosing the movies I want to come back to over and over again. The movies that stand out. The movies that inspire me as an artist. Or simply movies I really like. I've done videos on my favorite movies before, so consider this yet another update. You will see some repeats, and that's to be expected, but I sprinkled in a hefty amount of new additions in there too. First time it was 40, the next time it was 50, this time we're going all the way to 100. Why so many? Because there were too many amazing films that I didn't want to leave off the list. So, why talk anymore? Let's talk some more about my fave movies. Here are my top 100 favorite films. The Rocky Horror Picture Show. A rock opera involving a newlywed couple being held captive by an eccentric transvestite and his studly robot creation. This film was pretty shocking for the time, as it dealt with many things that mainstream audiences weren't ready for. Now, it's pretty tame by today's standards, but that don't make it any less fun. As a veteran of musicals, I love this movie's rock and roll soundtrack and its tribute to classic science fiction and horror films. A more upbeat and toe-tapping film to watch around Halloween time. Dumb and Dumber. Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels play two down-on-their-luck numbskulls who set off on a journey to Aspen, Colorado to return a woman's briefcase, with mobsters after the money in the case hot on their trail. This is one of those comedy movies that just makes me laugh and laugh and laugh. Just when I think I remember every funny part, I rewatch it and I see something new. It also represents a time period that was a bridge between the early 90s and the late 90s. Can't really put my finger on it, but it's just one of those movies that could only be made at the time it came out. And that's what makes it so great. Suspiria. A young woman joins a dance academy where a lot of gruesome murders are occurring, and it turns out the academy is a coven of witches. Directed by Italian horror master Dario Argento, this is a horror movie that's a feast for the eyes. In contrast with the bright colored cinematography are some of the most gruesome deaths you'll ever see on film. The plot is very puzzling and doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that only enhances the uncomfortable feelings and makes this movie all the more frightening. The Simpsons Movie. Our favorite yellow family finds themselves on the run from EPA agents when Homer accidentally pollutes the local lake and makes Springfield a quarantine zone. In an era when theatrically released movies based off cartoons was considered cinematic suicide, this movie came around and not only proved that they can make money, they can be great movies all by themselves. You don't have to be a Simpsons fan to enjoy this film, but for fans, it's definitely a treat. It's one of the funniest movies I've ever seen, and this list wouldn't be complete without it. Napoleon Dynamite. A nerdy high school student helps his best friend run for class president while trying to survive a crazy family life back home. When this movie came out, it was the Wayne's World of its era. My friends and I constantly quoted it, from classics like, "Tina, you fat lard, come get some dinner," to "Vote for Pedro," to "Sweet." I watched it again recently thinking it was going to be dated, but I found myself getting pretty nostalgic with it. Looking back, this movie is high school. All the awkward dialogue, all the tropes, and all the weird stuff you did with your friends on your free time. It fits high school to a T. I'm amazed that it's a movie with no plot, yet so many plots all going on at once, never feeling sloppy or unfocused. It's a movie that is definitely enjoyed in the time period it came out, but it's one that I love revisiting whenever I feel like traveling back to 2004. Lethal Weapon. Danny Glover plays a veteran police officer named Murtaugh, who gets paired with a risk-taking, spry cop named Riggs, played by Mel Gibson, who have to put aside their differences to track down a gang of drug smugglers. This is a movie that came out during the golden age of action films from the late 80s to the early 90s. While the buddy cop genre has become a tired cliche, this is the one that started it all, and the best of the bunch. Gibson and Glover make this movie, and they elevate it more than its simple plot could have with lesser talented actors. It's a great mix of snappy dialogue and thrilling action that the film's writer, Shane Black, would become known for later on down the line. Shaun of the Dead. A British man teams up with his best friend as they save their town from invading zombies while trying to get back together with his ex-girlfriend and make amends with his mother. The first in Edgar Wright's Cornetto trilogy is a send-up to zombie movies, and a damn good one at that. It manages to balance out a good amount of scares with a countless amount of laughs. It does a great job of paying tribute to the genre that came before it while poking fun at its cliches, as a good parody should do. The Room. A loudmouth foreigner, at least I think he's a foreigner, is caught between a developing relationship between his fiancée and his best friend. I know, seems like a bad idea to put such a badly put together movie on my favorites list, but hey, good or bad, this is a list of my favorite movies. And this is a film that's so bad, it's almost a miracle. How did we get something so beautiful by accident? It's great for all the wrong reasons. Bad acting, awkward dialogue, confusing plot points, and just a complete lack of understanding of what makes a decent movie. It's truly a train wreck of cinema that needs to be studied and admired for that matter. The Monster Squad. A group of young kids discover the diary of monster hunter Van Helsing and must save their small town from a gang of monsters that are dead set on taking over the world. A group of kids fighting against all the classic movie monsters. Where was this movie my whole life? The kids in it act like kids, but they're not annoying, and some of them are even badass. For a low-budget production, the makeup and the costumes are top-notch, and a great modern update to the classic monsters. It's a charming little slice of 80s cheese that's a must-see for any monster movie fans out there. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. A group of young adults take a trip to Texas and end up at the mercy of a family of cannibals. A horror movie that set the standards for many that came after it. Being a country boy myself, I love the twisted characters and plot thrown into a familiar and friendly setting. My favorite kind of horror movies are the ones that show the evil of humanity. Here we have a family of cannibals dwelling in their own land isolated from society. A very realistic and down-to-earth plot that can very well be possible. It also has very little music and lets the sound effects and ambience set the tone. A really chilling movie that's one of the few horror films that comes close to actually scaring me. Sin City, an anthology movie that follows three characters who get caught up in the violence and corruption of a gritty city. I'm a sucker for comic book movies that look like comic book movies, and I can't think of one that does that better than this film. Robert Rodriguez did an impeccable job of matching the style and feel of Frank Miller's comic. Black and white gets me every time. There's something so crisp and pure about it that enhances all the gore and nastiness of human nature that this film exploits. Not to mention, Bruce Willis is in it. I love him in practically everything he's in, and this one is no exception. A modern day film noir with a bloody twist. A Nightmare on Elm Street. Young adults in a small town are killed off one by a killer who's able to invade their dreams and murder them while they sleep. Here's a brilliant idea for a tired genre. What if a killer could kill you in your dreams? Talk about a scary idea. Sleep is when you're at your most vulnerable, and the fact that there's a guy out there who can take you out when you're unable to defend yourself can send shivers up anybody's spine. Aside from sporting one of the best villains in film history, this movie used its ideas to the fullest and played around with the concept of nightmares. As a sucker for media that deals with dreams, I eat this classic all up. The Crow. A rock star and his fiancée are killed on the night before Halloween, and he is brought back as the Crow, an angel of death who sets out to take revenge on his killers. From an era when comic book movies actually looked like comic book movies, this film is a visual feast. A film that's gritty and dark and looks beautiful because of it. That alone makes it one of my favorite movies. That alone would make it one of my favorite films, if it wasn't for the fast-paced plot, great acting from Brandon Lee and Ernie Hudson, and the awesome rock music soundtrack. Add on to the fact that this movie inspired my favorite wrestler of all time, and you got a gritty piece of film history that gets better with age. Kill Bill Volumes 1 and 2. A non-linear bloody tale of revenge as a pregnant bride goes on a quest to kill her former assassin colleagues and boss who attempted to murder her on her wedding day. Quentin Tarantino is a director who's just as big a movie fan as we all are, and this film is an example of that. He pays tribute to kung fu and samurai movies with a signature over-the-top bloody style. I couldn't put one or the other on this spot. I had to include both movies as they form one complete film. While the first one is more of a non-stop action film, the second one is more of a dialogue-heavy western. But both are entertaining films that are best watched back-to-back. One of Tarantino's best. One of. "12 Angry Men." 12 jurors talk extensively about a court case they just finished watching, with the life of a young kid sitting on the line. Here's a courtroom drama that focuses on the jury rather than the case itself. We never get to see anything else, and only know the details of the court case based on the stories the men tell. Other than a few shots of them using the restroom, the camera never leaves the room they meet in. That is brilliant. I'm a firm believer that less is more, and this movie is a perfect example of that. Sometimes you don't need several locations, complex camera angles, special effects, and all those nooks and crannies. Sometimes you just need a great script, great direction, and fantastic performances. And I can't think of any other film that does that better than this one. Labyrinth. An older teen's little brother is kidnapped by an evil goblin king, and she sets off on a quest through a deadly maze in order to get him back. Fantasy is another love of mine. I'm drawn to epic stories of monsters and adventure, and 80s fantasy films are unlike any other, and this one is an example of the gold standard from that era. Directed by Jim Henson and his team of talented puppeteers, they put together a beautiful world filled with childlike imagination that sucks you away from the real world. Add in a soundtrack and great performance by the late great David Bowie to top off just how silly yet magical this film truly is. The Big Lebowski. An avid bowler gets caught up in a case of mistaken identity and sets off on a quest to seek revenge for his damaged rug. Never have I seen a film so randomly spliced together, yet so brilliantly told. The story goes in all kinds of directions you don't expect, yet they all mold together seamlessly. I think that's what I love most about this movie. I've always been a fan of stories that are all over the place, yet they somehow come together in a coherent story at the end. The Coen brothers are known for their complex crime thrillers, but with this, they've shown they can do comedy, and do it well. Pulp Fiction. In this tribute to classic film noir comics, the lives of bandits, mobsters, a boxer, and a gangster's wife all intertwined together in this semi-anthology film. Yet another Tarantino movie, and his magnum opus. I checked this one out feeling that the hype was going to cause me to be disappointed by it, but thankfully, I not only ended up enjoying it, but loving it. I love following all these characters and seeing exactly what's going to happen to them, and how they're all going to interact. The non-linear storytelling, being Tarantino's trademark, only helps enhance this film to be something of a masterpiece. Last of the Mohicans. A peaceful member of the last Mohican tribe sets off on a quest to rescue the daughters of British colonials who were kidnapped by a rival tribe. As a huge history buff and a lover of Native American culture, this is a go-to movie for me. When I'm not enjoying some of the most creative action set pieces I've seen in a film, I'm admiring just how beautiful this film looks. I love the vast wilderness and gracious mountain ranges this movie shows. I'm an outdoorsman, and you can't get more outdoors than this. Might not be a movie I watch much for the story, but dang me if it ain't fun to look at. Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. The famous comedy duo find themselves caught between trying to prevent Dracula from stealing Costello's brain to put in Frankenstein's monster and not dying at the hands of the Wolfman. Once again, as a big monster movie fan, I couldn't not have this film on my list. I love both the great monster action and the comedic routines on display. You'd think a movie this old would be dated by today's standards, but I enjoy it just fine many years after its release. I watch it every Halloween, as it's the definitive horror comedy in my eyes.